Is related to preliminary HSC engineering studies. Specifically, this is the fourth unit of the Year 11 course, Biomedical Engineering, and it is a supplement to the innovations and ethical considerations that we talked about last time. I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. This is the second time I did this recording. My computer crashed and I have to start again, so let's get to it. I'm always excited to play this song. I remember when I first saw this film clip, I was in a KFC and I thought, hey, that film clip's great. Very quickly, it's about a guy, he is riding his bike and he gets hit by a car. He's very sad and he rides bikes and he has to sit back and watch as his friends are riding bikes, but then he goes and gets his prosthetic fitted and he does lots of good practicing, but then he falls down. So all rudimental songs seem to have a big bridge where, you know, the part where you really pump up for that last, it's a great running song for that last 100-meter dash. But he gets back on his bike and he tries again. Is he going to get there? There you go. There's the drop and he gets there. And then he can start riding his bike with his friends, and it's great. Anyway, great film clip. So we're going to be looking at some prosthetics, but first of all, some links. Golly Moses, I think I've closed it. Let's hope there's another one. There's Daddy Pig again. He just won't go away, Daddy Pig. Is that the entire set of things open a second time? Because that is a concern. Okay. I think that was my previous recording. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with some things here. So we're going to talk about self-driving wheelchairs in a second, and here you can see a wheelchair that climbs upstairs, and that looks pretty amazing. That's a great idea, except that modern wheelchairs are really, the thing that kind of defines them is that they're so lightweight that they fold and they're easy to put away. So there is obviously an advantage of wheelchairs that can climb stairs, but when I look at the Reddit comments, they say, yeah, there is a risk that they're quite heavy. So, as with all things, nothing's perfect. We're going to talk about artificial organs. This person here, Sally Sattel, she's an advocate for paying people to be organ donors because it's an interesting case study in economics that organ donors save the medical industry, I guess we could say. So in Australia, that would be the taxpayers, but in some places, you have to pay yourself for dialysis. Organ donors save the recipients of organ transplants an enormous amount of money. And we could incentivize those people to give up a kidney that they're not using. But unless you're Ned Flanders, because in an episode Ned Flanders he's from The Simpsons, he's a very charitable person. He gives a kidney up for free, but very few people are willing to do that. The thing is a very touchy subject because we don't want to create a situation of perverse incentives. I'm happy to discuss that more in detail in class. My uncle had a kidney transplant, and that's an example that I can talk about. We looked at stethoscope. We talked about stethoscopes previously, and this is the 99% Invisible podcast. You know, I'm a big fan of many 99% Invisible podcasts. And we have endoscopes. So the first endoscopes, you can imagine that was fairly uncomfortable to stick down your throat. Probably even more uncomfortable if you're getting colonoscopy. These days, a colonoscopy, those endoscopes go up your rear end. And they can help identify cancers and take biopsies and things. We have things like stents, which are pretty, they often seem pretty uninteresting, but they save lives. they can be used to prevent a blood vessel like a vein or an artery that's going to collapse, or they can help people who have got, they're born with birth defects in their heart, for instance. So hospital beds are an unsung biomedical innovation in that they prevent you from getting bed sores, and they can be quite expensive. These ones are $2,000, but a hospital bed it can be $15,000. Assistive robots. There's a movie, a 2012 movie called Robot and Frank, which talks about an assistive robot, and Japan is looking at that because Japan has an aging population. So normally at the start of the course, I put a picture up on the wall, and I divide the whiteboard into 4, and I talk about 4 major areas. So we have replacements, things where we're replacing something with something else. Here we have treatments, and here we have assistive devices, and here we have diagnostics, so scanners, and so things like a ECG is the machine goes beep, beep. An EEG is for your brain. It detects brain activity. But even things like medical swabs are part of diagnosis. In terms of EKG, is that? I think ECG for electrocardiogram, EKG. There you go. Same thing. Okay. Syringes are another unsung hero of biomedical innovation. When I recorded this last time, I mentioned the TV show Lost. They had to give a blood transfusion on the island, and setting up a syringe to take the blood was a bit of a challenge. Glasses. So I wear prescription spectacles. So that's another biomedical innovation that we take for granted. An interesting one is hair transplant. I remember writing this up earlier this year for the class that I was teaching, and hair transplants would be an amazingly lucrative thing because there'd be a lot of money. There's a movie with Clive Owen and Julia Roberts, and the big MacGuffin about industrial espionage is about a formula for replacing hair, and that would be a billion-dollar industry. I think that, that covers quite a few things, but we're going to have a look at some more things. Okay, so we're looking at distance surgery. So I'll see if I can find. So we've got a surgeon who's doing this surgery robotically, and here are the robot arms, and there are some junior surgeons on site, and I think he's performing surgery hundreds of kilometers away. And we're now back to here, this surgeon who operates hundreds of kilometers away. Okay, so moving on, here we have gloves that can translate sign language into speech and text. Tell me about. I probably should have had her doing the sign language. Now, of course, like all things, there's people who are saying, hey, it's not perfect, and it's not perfect. So we've looked at organ printing, and so we've looked at the AbioCore heart. Well, this is a 3D printed silicon heart. And here we have a 3D prosthetics. So this is kind of ties into that the rudimental song. So this person's got a open source bionic leg. The idea of it, by being open source, it means that everyone worldwide can contribute to lead to better and better improvements. Here we can see a robotic hand that is being controlled by its user without being attached, just so that you can see that it's the no strings attached component, I guess. Okay. So 3D printed organs, we're talking here about biological 3D printed organs. So they make a material that can be poked and prodded. And so here's some more details. about how that works. Obviously, this is beyond the scope of the Year 11 course or even the HSC course. Monash University is working on bionic eyes. We've talked in class about some of the limitations of bionic eyes, but it's a field that people are very interested in. Facebook is working on augmented reality where people can wear glasses that can help you to understand what's being said. So it processes the movement of the lips and it augments the audio that comes into your ears to make this sound clearer. Anyone who's done a listening test might know that it's a lot easier to understand someone in a foreign language when you can see their lips compared to if you're on the phone or listening to a recording. So I have a couple of other links here that are, I guess, a bit more tenuous. So this is about this is a Radiolab podcast that talks about using technology in therapy, and it talks about the Eliza chatbot, which is as old as the hills. But then later on, it talks about using augmented reality in therapy. In terms of perception, I have in another video I think I talked about a course that I listened to, which I thought was very good, talking about perception. And this podcast talks about some studies into the idea that perception could be more complicated than we think, and that plants do demonstrate some signs of a memory, that a chemical memory, and I think it's a really interesting podcast. Last thing on just perception generally is CGP Grey has a podcast called You Are Two, which talks about people who had the link between the two hemispheres of the brain cut. And when that happened, we found that it almost appears as though those two brains communicate as two separate entities. It's very too difficult for me to go into, at least not in a second time I'm recording this, but interesting and worth looking into. Okay, so Jordan Newen used to be at UTS. I think he was a PhD student. And what I was looking for was a picture of the self-driving wheelchair that he developed. This is for quadriplegics who don't have any movement at all. And this chair allows the brain activity to direct the chair. And we can see here is someone testing it out. So he's wearing a headband, and from the headband it detects where he wants to go. And then the intelligence, what Jordan worked on, is in programming the chair to not run into obstacles. So I believe he now works at Google in self-driving cars. And we have he released a book last year. I haven't read the book, don't endorse the book. It's just something I thought was interesting. That work is continuing, with British Airways trialling it at New York's largest airport. This post is talking about MIT trialing a test that could identify people who had COVID, even if they didn't have symptoms, from the cough pattern. This is about 3D printed cartilage for people with arthritis. This is about wearable biometric sensors that can be replaced. Reused was what I meant to say. Okay. Something I think is really interesting is we could see a situation where if you had a pacemaker, that you could get an email saying, "Hey, if you don't send us this amount of Bitcoin, we're going to turn off your pacemaker." And I think that would be a really scary threat. In terms of, and this is, I have next couple of links are going to be about DNA testing and about, I guess, the civil liberties that are related to that. So the movie Gattaca, which is, I think now, it's old, at least 20, 25 years old, talks about how DNA testing could erode some of the civil liberties that we take for granted. So things like you could be denied life insurance based on your DNA test, or as we'll find out later, even possibly a relative's DNA test could be used against you. This case explores a landmark case in Australia where the town of Weewar, 600 men all got DNA testing to find a rapist. And the judge in charge, Michael Kirby, talked about that setting a dangerous civil liabilities precedent. The information that you send to 23andMe or other similar DNA ancestry information, that can be used against you in court. And more importantly, your family's DNA can be used against you. So if you refuse to give a DNA test, your brother or sister or your cousin's DNA could be used against you. There's a move for DNA tests to be available at work. At GP, general practitioner, so your regular doctor. I did want this video should be of IVF, but IVF is another interesting area that I wanted to talk about, where IVF, an increasing number of Australians are relying on IVF, in vitro fertilization, to be able to conceive, and this is another example of the positive benefit of biomedical engineering in people's lives. So you can get part of your brain replaced by a prosthetic. There are prosthetic hippocampuses or hippocampal prosthesis, and this brings up again the issue of animal testing. And then we're moving on to CRISPR. So again, we have Radiolab. They did a great podcast on CRISPR. I'm going to make my kids listen to that next time I drive to school. And Kierkegaard has a very good summary that is probably a little bit more advanced, but very interesting. And this is quite significant because what it does is it actually affects your DNA. And your DNA has a huge impact on a lot of things like your weight, your success at school, your athletic ability. All of these things are connected to your DNA. CRISPR is also really interesting in that it has a landmark patent dispute. So two different universities both tried to claim that they were the ones who should be able to make money off CRISPR. Basically, an East Coast and West Coast teams. Both disputing. As my understanding, as of this article, it looks like it was decided in late 2020 that the West Coast, California, Berkeley, won the dispute, and the lead researcher, a woman called Jennifer Doudna, I don't know, that's what I'm going to go with. She's the one interviewed on the Radiolab podcast. She got the Nobel Prize last year, around about the same time as that patent law case was decided. This is an MRI machine that is 20 times cheaper than ordinary MRIs. So then we have, in terms of perception, we have another series of brain implants. So I'm going to actually switch to a different song now. So there is a famous Metallica song, where is that here, called One, and One has an interesting film clip where a young boy, it's from the movie Johnny Get Your Gun. And in this film clip, he gets horribly hurt in an explosion, and you can see his life through flashbacks. And it shows his life in this. He can't see, he can't hear. He's just he describes himself as, I'm just a piece of meat that keeps on living. And eventually, he's able to communicate to his nurses through Morse code. And I don't know. I'll leave that there. I'll see if I can play this on low and hopefully not have my video taken down by Metallica, because they like to sue people. Okay, but I've got to keep talking so that there's not enough audio for the algorithm to detect it. Okay, so 2 men in Australia have had paperclip-sized implants in their brains to allow them to control a computer. To control their thoughts, to control a computer with thoughts. So this is a big innovation, a big development from the sip and puff that we saw earlier. Here's an article on the same, nope, I think we're getting to that. We can also, we've talked before about, we can directly send images to the brain. So Cell is one of the three big scientific journals, and they talked about we can write letters that people can see by direct implant into the brain, which is a pretty big innovation. So, okay, these are all linked to Elon Musk's work in Neuralink, and what we should be concerned about is that the accessibility of this software. We don't want to create a situation where everyone has to have a Facebook or a Tesla account in order to be able to use the services that become essential for day-to-day life. As it is at the moment, it's well, for instance, at the moment, it's an essential thing for Australian civil servants to have a MyGov account, and that's a government-owned thing. But when it's a public entity, we also every Australian has or every person in New South Wales has a Google account that links to a lot of this school email, for instance. So there's concerns that if one big company has access to everyone's brain chips, that could present ethical dilemmas in the future. So this is a CNC machine that makes dental crowns. Normally it takes 2 appointments to get a dental crown, but with this, my dentist can do it in 1 3-hour visit. When my youngest daughter was getting a plate, I talked to the dentist about what the polymer they used in the plate was, and about the technologies and 3D printing. He said that this area is an area that's really rapidly developing, and they have like an autoclave in the back that they use for setting fillings and things. But really, we could be looking at a lot of things like orthodontics and bridge work becoming more and more done in the dentistry, and done kind of while you wait. So getting close to the end, got maybe another 8. KFC is working on 3D printing chicken nuggets, and last year Singapore was the first country to allow the sale of synthetic meat. They were in fact chicken nuggets. This has big environmental benefits, as we can see here, that Beyond Meat uses way less water, takes way less land, uses about half the energy measured in megajoules. So that's our MJ reference. It produces less methane and less carbon dioxide. So all benefits of using synthetic meat. I am definitely, this is Beyond Meat, this is not synthetic meat, but the point is still worthwhile. Okay, so then we have probably the biggest story in biomedical ethics in the last decade is this entrepreneur called Elizabeth Holmes and her company Theranos. And basically the thing that she was selling was a diagnostic tool that could take a drop of blood, and it could, you'd put it in a machine about the size of a photocopier, and it would give you all of your blood work. And I remember talking to a lot of my friends, almost all of my friends from high school, and the friends that I used to talk to when I first finished high school, that I met through them. They all worked in science, in biochemistry mostly, molecular biology, and I remember talking to them about it, and they just said, I don't see how it's physically possible that she can be doing, or Theranos could be doing all these things that they're claiming. And it turned out that, in fact, they couldn't do all these things that they were claiming. She's definitely behind bars. I don't know if she has been sentenced as of the time of recording. I think she's been convicted. Yeah, it looks like as of late 2020, I think she's been found guilty, but I don't think that she has been. Well, that says charged. Okay, while I'm on that, because I don't think I have Martin Scarelli here. I should also talk about him. I'll write that down. Okay, so Neuralink, Elon Musk puts a chip in a pig's brain. So it's like a Fitbit, and they're using it just to register the neural activity of the pig. Again, this brings up questions of testing on animals. Apple produced a watch that can send messages in Braille for the blind or vision impaired. Okay, so here's what we'll talk about. Martin Scarelli. Okay, just because I will forget. Okay, so this guy, this guy here, he was not a particularly popular guy. What he did is he bought a medicine, a life-saving medicine that was currently being sold for about $20 a dose, and he raised the cost to $750 a dose. Now, his argument was that no one was going to die. That if it was only going to be the insurance companies that were going to have to pay him this money, and that the companies just simply weren't charging enough for the medicine. Now, he did end up going to jail, not for being a jerk, not because that's illegal, but he went to jail for the same reason as Elizabeth Holmes for fraud. Interestingly, he also bought the most expensive album ever made, which is Wu-Tang's Once Upon a Time in Shaolin, and I think he paid $2 million for it. Yeah, we go, $2 million album, which he then leaked. So the whole idea was there would only be one copy, and that one person would own it, and that they weren't allowed to distribute it. But he leaked the album, and the police now own the album because it got seized. Like when any other drug lord gets arrested, their assets become public property. But this example also echoes EpiPens. So EpiPens, they cost about $10 to make, but they went up. So there used to be a competitor to EpiPens, and after that competitor got taken off the market when people died accidentally, the cost of EpiPens increased by 5 times. So I think they went from being $100 to $500, at least in the US. And this led to a Senate inquiry where US senators were asking to explain. And the fact is that an EpiPen can be made, and there have been universities that have made budget EpiPens for $10. So it's another example. I mean, obviously, the people who developed the EpiPen, those engineers should be paid for their work. It's just about making a fair price for life-saving technologies. So these are all part of, I guess, our ethical considerations. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. This is a gun that shoots a chemical web that you can spray onto wounds to help it to heal. So yeah, rather than a bandage, this thing moves much more comfortably than a traditional bandage does. It also improves the patient outcome, so like they're more likely to heal faster. I'll leave that there, but I'll link to the paper. And working backwards now, 3D printers that can print human skin. And electronic aspirin. I don't want to end on that one. Okay, nanosensors. So nanosensors can be things that could be dozens of atoms wide, or dozens of atoms wide is probably fair, and that we could use this to better regulate, or to better regulate people's biometric data, so to know whether or not if so, for instance, if you have cancer, you take a lot of blood tests. These are time consuming, they're invasive, they're painful, they take time. All of these things could maybe be done better by nanosensors. That's a good X-ray, by the way, of a hip stem, a femoral stem that we saw earlier. So in the last recording, we talked about forged stems. We can see that that's sort of what that area, that a femoral stem looks like. Very common HSC question. Okay, opioids Inc., the case against Big Pharma. So big pharmaceutical companies, there's often questions raised against them. This was not the opioids being the things like the same idea as heroin, but these days heroin is not as commonly used, nearly as commonly used as a lot of the opioids like endone or I don't know, codeine, those sorts of things. This kills a lot of people in the US. In Australia, it's much harder to get to be prescribed, for your doctor to prescribe opioids as painkillers. It's also worth mentioning Four Corners. They got in some degree of trouble about statins, but that's probably something I'll talk to you in class. If you remind me, I'll talk about that. Okay, so that is it. We are done for this recording. The next recording, I will go through casting.